Hi everyone, my name is Marcus and you're watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Today, we're talking coral choices for beginners. So you've decided to get all wet and salty and start a reef tank. That's awesome, welcome to the hobby. Likely part of the reason why you wanted to get involved and have a tank is because you've seen some photos of amazing tanks with awesome fish and corals. I totally understand the desire to have an amazing reef tank full of awesome creatures in your home. It's something that all reefers share. However, not all of them are created equal when it comes to the difficulty of their care and requirements. But that doesn't mean you need to start with boring coral. That's why today, I'm going to show you some amazing corals that are great for beginners. I promise this won't be yet another video that says to buy leathers, pallies and star polyp. Instead, I'm going to show you just how awesome some easy to keep and sometimes overlooked corals can be. Now, some of these corals can be on the cheaper side, others on the more expensive side, and some in between. I won't really be commenting on the price of these corals, as prices can vary so much depending on a number of factors. However, none of the corals I'm going to suggest are what I would consider to be top end. This is, after all, a guide for beginner-friendly corals. First up is Cniaria lacrymalis. They're sometimes called meat corals or donut corals. A single one can expand up to 4 to 5 times the size of the skeleton, so they're a great way to fill out an empty corner of the tank. They don't need strong flow, and they only need moderate light. They're not an aggressive coral, and just make sure you know how big they can inflate to so that they have enough room around them. Cniaria come in a massive variety of colours, ranging from blues and greens to reds, oranges and pinks. They're often overlooked and underrated coral, yet they can be super bright and have semi-translucent flesh, which is very unique in the hobby. Cniaria will readily accept feeding of meaty foods like mysis or brine, or larger pellets and LPS food. Next up is morphs or corallimorphs. Now, I know what you're thinking. The guy at the LFS already tried to push some huge piece of live rock that was already covered with 20 green and brown morphs on you as an easy way to start your tank. Don't buy it. Don't even take it if it's free. It will be full of pests and vermitid snails, and you don't want your entire tank overrun. What you should do instead is just buy single specimens and only choose the ones that have interesting colors and shapes. There are literally hundreds of varieties, so there's no reason to settle for a dozen of the same common dull green or brown one that so many new tanks somehow seem to attract. I dedicated the entire back left corner of my tank to morphs and have 5 different varieties in there. I started with only a single 1 or 2 of each and added them to the same area over the course of a month or 2 while I was focusing on that coral. Some notes on morphs is that they don't like strong flow. It can cause them to wander quickly around the tank or detach from the rock altogether. If you need to move a morph, the best way is to chip away the rock from underneath its foot and then glue that down elsewhere. They can reproduce relatively quickly, however you'll find that the baby morphs or pups don't have as strong a hold on the rock as their parents and can be fairly easily peeled off. You can then place them in a Tupperware container with holes drilled in it for flow, and then fill that with a little bit of rock rubble for a week or 2 until they attach to a small piece of rock. They're then ready to be sold, traded, or put wherever you want in your tank. Similar to morphs are Rickordia or ricks, however you'll likely find them are much more expensive. However, the cheaper ricks that may look grey or brown can sometimes have a good chance of colouring up after a month or 2 under tank lighting. So if you want to take a gamble on one, in my tank, I started with a dark green rick, which has gone much brighter and now has yellow in it. Next up is Euphyllia. This includes corals commonly called hammers, torches, and frog spawn. They're relatively hardy corals. They have modest light requirements and flow requirements, and they can come in a massive variety of colors, shapes, and sizes. Hammers and torches were my first corals. As you can see, I still have many in my tank today. My recommendation here is to buy a couple of different types, say 2 to 3 heads of different hammers, such as green hammers, blue reverse stem hammers, and gold orange hammers if they aren't too expensive at your LFS. You can group all of the hammers together and form an instant garden in a section of your tank. You can then do the same thing with different varieties of torch and frog spawn. I strongly advocate to beginners not to do the typical trap of scattering your first corals throughout your entire tank. It's not really a great look and can lead to poor coral placement and difficulties later on. I'm a strong advocate for finding the best location for a particular type of coral and dedicating that area of your tank to maintaining a small garden for that species. Whilst at first this may look unbalanced, you'll quickly find that this is a superior approach and find that it's far easier as you move on to your next coral species and form another garden in another section of your tank. One word of caution on hammers. Anecdotally, I've heard a lot that the branching variety tends to be more hardy than the wall variety, and this has held true in my experience as well. So I would suggest avoiding the wall hammers until you have some longevity with the branching variety. Okay, our next coral recommendation is the Duncan, or Duncanopsamia. I think that's how you pronounce the scientific name. They come in a couple of varieties, but the main reason I love Duncans so much is that they are a great coral to place in locations that won't work for almost anything else. Due to their growth pattern and the branching nature and ability to almost reach around crevices and corners, they can be used to fill out hard to fill locations in the tank. Duncans are super fun and easy to feed as well. They exhibit a great feeding response to almost any pellet or meaty food. They're extremely hardy. One of my Duncans here, to be honest, has been badly abused. I allowed it, due to poor gluing, to fall on my gonnies not once, not twice, but 3 times before I finally used putty to permanently secure it to my rockwork. And boy, after all that, did it look awful. I was convinced that it was almost completely dead, but looking at it today, you wouldn't know. Not only has it shown amazing ability to fully heal and fill back out again, but it has grown new heads and adapted to the location that I have it, where it's receiving low flow and dappled light because of the SPS sitting above it. A Duncan will be a coral that will grow with your tank and is also very easy to frag if it starts to outgrow a location. The last coral that I'm going to recommend as a good beginner coral is Favia or Favites, or brain corals. Now, as far as beginner corals go and the other ones that I've listed, this one verges on more of an intermediate level difficulty coral. However, I think with some basic considerations and knowledge, it's a coral a beginner can manage and use as a good stepping stone onto more advanced corals. They tolerate quite a range of lighting and flow. I have mine higher up in strong light and strong flow, and it's been there for over a year and done extremely well. However, I've also seen examples of people keeping Favia in low flow and low light conditions. The major challenge with Favia is that they can be extremely aggressive. They can send out sweeper tentacles that will decimate basically any other coral they come into contact with, and the length of these tentacles can really take people by surprise. I've seen some larger, more mature Favia with sweeper tentacles up to 20 centimeters long. They're also able to put out mesenterial filaments and basically digest an adjacent coral down to bare skeleton in a single night. This makes placement key. Take into account the direction of flow and the distance to any neighbors. Being an SPS coral, they will also consume significant alkalinity and calcium, so make sure that you take that into account when adding them to your tank. They may be the tipping point in your tank that move you from water changes alone from maintaining macro elements. But with these considerations, Favia can be an outstanding coral. I've found them to be pretty tough and tolerant of various conditions. Favia come in a huge variety of colors, and there are tons of named variants such as my purple and green Dragon Soul Favia, and heaps more unnamed variants as well. My Dragon Soul Favia that I have front and center of my tank at the top of the bridge was added to my tank very early on and has never skipped a beat. Whilst it's a slow grower, which is perhaps a good thing given how aggressive they can be, it's always been puffy and colorful and a centerpiece of my tank. Well, that's it for now. If you have ideas for great beginner corals, feel free to leave a comment below. While you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Marcus. You've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Bye for now.